Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Up first, we'll get a reaction to that fatal shooting outside a Sikh temple in Surrey. We'll hear from reporter Joel Ballard on the investigation. And in Vancouver, a housing proposal that would double the population of the West Point Grey neighborhood goes to public consultation this week. We're asking, how do you balance the need for density with preserving neighborhoods? We're also watching to hear more this hour from the mayor of Surrey on policing in that city and next steps. Plus, your questions about electric vehicles after 12:30. I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team is looking into a case after an influential member of the Sikh community was shot dead last night. Surrey RCMP say it took place about 8:30 outside the Guru Nanak Sikh temple. The victim was the temple president and a prominent figure. News of his death has prompted crowds to gather outside the Gurdwara last night. CBC's Joel Ballard joins us now live. Hi there, Joel.
Hi, Michelle.
What do we know about what happened?
Well, Michelle, I'm outside of the Guru Nanak Temple here in Surrey. We know last night, Surrey RCMP says there was a shooting around 8:30 in the parking lot. When they arrived, they found a man suffering from gunshot wounds inside a vehicle in the parking lot. The man did die on the scene from his injuries. You know, last night and up until today, we still haven't gotten confirmation from police on the identity of the victim, but we have confirmed CBC News independently that the victim was Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Okay, what more can you tell us about the victim?
Well, Nijjar was an influential member of BC's Sikh community. He was also the president of this temple behind me, and he has been a longtime vocal advocate for Khalistan separatism of the Sikh majority state of Punjab in India.
And we heard there the chanting, Joel. What has been the reaction in the community?
Well, quickly last night after the shooting, by 10:30, it was already packed outside of the temple here. Easily 100 people, a crowd of 100 people gathered, chanting, calling for justice, calling for a free Khalistan. Today we spoke with the World Sikh Organization of Canada, who says Nijjar was aware of the threats against his life due to his advocacy work. And at this point, the World Sikh Organization of Canada is calling for a thorough and full investigation into his killing. Michelle?
And where does the investigation go now, Joel?
Well, as you mentioned, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team has taken over the case. They are scheduled to hold a press conference today at 2 p.m. where we're expected to get some more information. At this point, they're asking anyone with any type of information who may have been at the scene, who may have dash cam footage, to contact police and share that information with them. Michelle?
Joel, thank you very much. That's the CBC's Joel Ballard reporting. 12:09 now, 1:09 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page, on cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Gem app. To a story from Friday now. Friday's bus crash near Prince George that landed 18 people in hospital is once again highlighting safety concerns with the province's unpaved service roads. Now, this is not the first time people have been injured while using back roads in BC. In 2019, 2 university students died in a rollover bus crash outside Bamfield on Vancouver Island. Now, as Janella Hamilton reports, advocates are raising their voices again, saying something needs to change.
I think people are using these roads more often than we've seen in the past.
This backroad safety expert says more drivers are relying on treacherous Forest Service roads that were initially designed for the logging industry to transport timber and are not as durable and safe as paved roads.
There's less traction on those roads. The corners are tighter. There's less visibility.
The concerns grow exponentially when natural disasters shut down major highways and all of that traffic is funneled to service roads. That's exactly what's happening on Vancouver Island right now with the continuing closure of Highway 4 due to a wildfire. This truck driver who has been using the detour says he recently witnessed a close call when a driver nearly lost control trying to navigate loose gravel on the bumpy road.
With light vehicles like trucks and cars, it just bounces them right out. And if you're going fast, you just right off the road.
On Friday, a charter bus carrying 30 pipeline camp workers was driving on the Firth Lake Forest Service Road about an hour from Prince George. It went off the road and crashed, sending 18 workers to the hospital. As of Sunday, Northern Health says everyone injured in the crash has been released. The cause of the crash is still unclear, but RCMP say early morning rain made conditions quite poor.
Most of those roads have limited drainage.
It's not the first time a bus has crashed on an unpaved road. In 2019, a bus rolled down an embankment near Bamfield, killing 2 University of Victoria students.
But on a forest service road or resource road, you never really know what's coming unless you know that road. So it's just another level of hazard out there.
The Bamfield crash sparked a probe into whether the province was adequately maintaining Forest Service roads. In his report, BC's Auditor General found the ministry did not properly manage safety and environmental risks. He called on the government to bring in more rigorous inspections and maintenance. The call now is for improved signage, more emphasis on drivers' training, and better use of the province's radio communications system. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Thanks to Janella Hamilton for that story. 12:12 now, 1:12 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. We are on CBC Radio 1, 88.1 FM in Vancouver. You can also catch us live streaming on our CBC Vancouver YouTube page. You can go to our website as well, cbc.ca/BC, or you can use the CBC Gem app. Thanks so much for joining us, however you are doing so. Very nice to have you. Well, in Vancouver, public consultations are beginning on a housing proposal that would double the population of the city's West Point Grey neighborhood. It's being spearheaded by 3 First Nations on the Jericho Lands. The project includes dozens of buildings and a mix of community and park spaces. The development is being opposed by some nearby homeowners in what is considered an upscale and wealthy part of the city. But the project is happening alongside a push by the province for more housing. And that's because of our growing population, with Metro Vancouver alone expected to grow by 1 million people by 2050. That's according to regional planners. Well, this morning on the early edition on CBC Radio 1, Stephen Quinn spoke to the City of Vancouver's Director of Planning, Teresa O'Donnell. And she says Vancouver has the smallest proportion of children aged under 12 of any major city in Canada, and that the city needs to become more attractive to families.
We do want to be a city that welcomes family. We know right now, even though we have this smallish proportion of school-age kids, we do have the largest proportion of millennials. So we just have to make sure that we can keep those folks here, that they don't move out to the suburban communities when they get ready to start a family. That's why we're introducing our missing middle policies in the fall, and we'll be working on some more attainable home ownership types. And of course, we work very hard on secured market rental.
Right.
As I'm sure you know, we've approved a lot more market rental that's actually been built. So we need to make sure that once we get those units approved, that they're following through with construction.
That was the City of Vancouver's Director of Planning, Teresa O'Donnell. We're asking you today about the housing challenges where you are. Is more density the answer to our housing shortages? And what role should heritage preservation play in these conversations about housing? Do you think families do want to live in apartments? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. And my guest is Tom Davidoff, Associate Professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Tom, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So housing. The need for housing is this endless conversation we have, right? How does this proposal for the Jericho Lands fit into the need and the policies that we have been seeing from the province and from the municipal government in Vancouver?
Well, it's very helpful. I think it's more than a year's worth of housing for the entire region or close to that. So, it's 30,000 more homes in a neighborhood adjacent. I think there's about that, or 30,000 people. I think that's about the population of West Point Grey, an entire neighborhood, obviously occupying much more land nearby. There's open space. I think there's something like schools, retail. So, a lot of homes, a lot of public goods. It's a terrific use of land.
And it's increased, right, from 10,000 to 13,000 homes. How needed do you think this is?
Well, obviously the homes are very badly needed, and they're going to great expense to build very tall buildings that are obviously structurally involved to build. So the upside must be very large, and prices are really high, and rents, and they justify this extent of construction. Because of the great need for homes. If there wasn't such a need, they wouldn't plow that much capital onto that little land.
You said very tall buildings. Some of the opposition we're seeing would like to see building heights capped at 8 stories. They don't think this is the right project for this area. What do you make of the opposition?
Well, I don't know what they mean by not the right project for the area. I trust the First Nations and their advisors and partners to figure out what makes the most money on the site. So the highest and best use, we say, is the most profitable use of the land. So the market wants 49 stories. The market might want more. They might be building shorter buildings than they really want to, just to not annoy the local population too much. Then the question is, okay, so you're building the right thing from the perspective of the landowner, obviously from the perspective of renters and people looking to buy housing. The more homes, the merrier. There is the issue of neighbors, right? What is this doing environmentally? You are going to ruin some people's views, I'm sure, although the towers are sited low on the site, which will reduce the extent to which it blocks people's views. You'll add traffic congestion, but people are going to live somewhere, right? So if they don't live on this site, you're probably going to cut down trees or destroy open space to build homes out in suburban sprawl. And wherever people live, they have to commute to work. The shorter the commute, the better. So on site, obviously, whatever they're building is not too much, or they build less. And in terms of off site, we get better affordability. And since people have to live somewhere, I think this is pretty environmentally friendly.
And is it necessarily so, though, that the more units you build, the more affordable they will be? Given if you see more luxury type apartments, luxury type condos, are you really going to see affordable units?
Right. So that's a study I'm currently working on with a colleague, Source Somerville. What is the extent to which homes filter down? And I think most of us believe there is filtering. And how does that happen? First of all, today's new homes are the older homes of the future, right? A lot of the older affordable homes we see today were once brand spanking new and probably commanded about a 20% premium on rents relative to where the older buildings are today. Secondly, it puts pressure on the rest of the market, right? The relatively affluent people who are willing to purchase or rent new homes, where would they be if they were not on site? They'd be competing for older units elsewhere. And so you're getting rid of the high bidders that would be bidding for homes elsewhere. I'm guessing the overwhelming majority of the 13,000 households that live on Jericho, if they didn't live on Jericho, would have lived somewhere in Greater Vancouver anyway, and certainly somewhere in Canada. So pretty much, like a game of musical chairs, homes are homes. Making homes worse doesn't improve affordability by much, because you've got to provide homes for everybody who lives in a region almost mechanically.
My guest is Tom Davidoff, Associate Professor at UBC Sauder School of Business, and we're asking you, in light of the Jericho Lands proposal going to public consultation this week, this is a housing project that would create 13,000 homes and some park space as well, asking you if density is the answer to housing shortages in BC. And do you think that conversations around heritage and neighborhood preservation should also be part of that? And do families do you think want to live in apartments? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Jackson is calling us from Vancouver. Hi, Jackson.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I am okay. And what do you think of this project and this proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michelle, coming to specifically to your, proposal and the plan, I don't have a lot of comments on that part because I'm not, as a regular citizen, I don't want to comment on that. But why I'm calling you guys today is I'm a student at university here in Vancouver, UBC especially, and I have been looking for any kind of rooms that's a little bit affordable to my budget, but I couldn't find anything at all, Michelle. I found a couple of places, and they're asking me $1,200, and you will be sharing with 9 people a house. And I guess this is number one crisis in Vancouver or in Canada, I guess. And the recording that you were providing to the people a couple minutes ago, Director of Housing Planning, I guess she's not even thinking about anything. She's saying we want to keep people here in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? People will not stay here. $1,200 just for a single room, Michelle. This is just out of control. I don't get it. She's saying we want to keep people here.
You said share with 9 others, Jackson?
Yeah, 9 people in the room. All of them are university students. You'll be sharing the room with 9 people and the 9 bathrooms. This is just I don't know. I mean, this is a number one crisis, I guess, in Canada. And yeah, the director of that planning saying we want to keep millennials in Vancouver. Michelle, don't get me wrong. I promise you this. As soon as I get my degree, I'll be out of the city. This is just not you can't stay here. You will go either bankrupt or you will be in the streets, unfortunately. I'm sorry for my tone as well.
Unaffordable for you. Jackson, thank you so much for calling.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle.
Take care. That's Jackson in Vancouver. Our number again, if you'd like to join the conversation as we discuss adding density as a way of addressing housing issues in BC. Do you think density is the answer? And what role should heritage preservation play in these conversations? So what about families, students? Do you think this is an answer for them when it comes to creating housing? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. We're talking about this because of the Jericho Lands project that goes to public consultation this week in Vancouver. And Tom Davidoff, I could see you nodding along as you were listening to Jackson there, talking about $1,200 for a place and having to share it with a whole lot of other people.
Yeah, first of all, I think we might have heard that caller. And if we haven't heard that caller, the last time
I think he's called before, yes.
Yeah, either that or another student in the same situation, which would be believable. Open houses for rentals are just jam-packed with people desperate to get a place. And he's coming to UBC. Of course, the Jericho Lands will be a fantastic place for UBC students. You've got both the 99 and the 44 bus, and the Lord willing, eventually the SkyTrain, taking you to UBC very easily from that site. Also a lovely walk or bike ride away. So a perfect place to house students or faculty at UBC. So no question, there's more than enough demand to fill up the site.
What we heard from Director of Planning from the City of Vancouver was this call to keep millennials in Vancouver, but also to attract families, right, with young children. There's often the argument made that families prefer single lots. We heard this last week. We were talking about the growth in population in Canada. We had a caller from Kelowna say, it's very hard to find a single family home here, and that's what I would like to raise my family. What do you make of that? How effective might something like this be then for people who have that expectation?
Well, I would like a unicorn that's rainbow colored, but I'm not going to get one. And
but can you keep families in town with apartments?
Yeah, townhomes, duplex, quadplex, multiplex, single family home with a yard in the city of Vancouver. That's just not appropriate use of land. Now, whether government should be putting its thumbs on the scale and saying, we don't want you empty nest retirees. We don't want you yuppie kids who just got out of university. We don't want you university students. What we really want are families. That's an interesting one. Obviously, you know, children growing up, having access to amenities in schools is really important. I think kids, of course, are the most important people we can think about in society. But there's a powerful argument to let the market, you know, decide who's going to live here. Obviously, young people without kids are a natural clientele to live in a place that's inherently expensive, where space is at a premium because you're convenient to work. So, you know, obviously the Board of Ed needs to get its act together in terms of building enough schools. But, you know, once the schools are built, should we be in the business of deciding which are the best residents to live in Vancouver, or should we let the market determine who wants to live in Vancouver? I think that's a challenging question.
So let me just probe you on that a little bit. So you don't think it's appropriate to try and create housing based on trying to appeal to a certain demographic?
I'm of mixed mind, right? If developers decide that the most valuable and best use of apartment space is to chop up the space into many, many 400 square foot units, because there's a lot of single young people who want to occupy units like that. Okay, well, that's what people want. If they're willing to pay more per square foot than families, should we say, no, we don't want so many yuppie kids, and we don't want so many downsizing retirees. What we mostly want are families with kids. You know, that's picking one group in society over the other. Now, kids are a pretty great group, so I can see why we would want to choose children over yuppies. they're cuter. But you know, that's a political choice, and it's not obvious that it's the right one.
Okay, I guess the intent is they will be, you know, going to school and going on to perhaps post-secondary, and then continuing their careers in the same city. I guess that might be the hope. But let's go to some callers here now as we ask you what your thoughts are on density, adding density in order to address housing shortages in BC. In Vancouver, public consultations are beginning this week on a housing proposal that would double the population of the city's West Point Grey neighborhood. This is the Jericho Lands proposal, and it's being spearheaded by 3 First Nations. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well with Tom Davidoff. And it includes dozens of buildings as well as a mix of community and park spaces. So we're asking you about the role of adding density in addressing housing in BC, and what about the role of heritage preservation as well, and neighborhoods? Do you think that should be part of the conversation? What do you think would attract families? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. We do have a few callers on the line, so we'll continue this conversation shortly after the news update as well. But right now, let's go to Lynn in Victoria. Hi, Lynn. Hi there, Lynn. Can you hear me? Lynn, I'm afraid we are not able to hear you. I can sort of, I believe you're there, but we can't hear you right now. If you want to just hold the line and see if we can improve the connection. But Benjamin is also waiting in Vancouver.
All right.
Hi there, Benjamin. Hi, Benjamin. Okay, it looks like we're having... Benjamin, can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you.
Oh, yes. Go ahead. My apologies. What do you make of this project and addressing housing with density?
Yeah, I'm a resident of the West End, so I'm a big advocate for density. And one of the kind of considerations I was concerned about was when we say we're protecting, you know, the heritage of the area, I kind of feel like it should be pointed out that a lot of those spaces, you know, Indigenous people were forcibly removed, and then the houses that were built were representative of a very colonial era. So when we say about preserving, heritage, I just kind of think that the folks who are pushing that point kind of fail to see the past in the area.
Benjamin, thank you very much for the call from Vancouver. Let me get a quick response there from Tom Davidoff when it comes to this project being spearheaded by MST.
Amen, right? I mean, it's almost ironic that the First Nations who had so much land stolen from them by settlers are sort of coming to the rescue of our, sort of political economy by providing lots and lots of housing where it's so desperately needed.
Tom, thanks so much. If you don't mind holding the line and just staying on the line with us on our Zoom connection, nice to have you. We're going to take a few more calls on this. A lot of calls coming in talking about adding density to address housing in BC. Do you think that's the answer? And what about that heritage preservation? How do you interpret that? And what do you think what role do you think that plays in the conversation? Love to hear from you. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. Lynn and Leanne are waiting on the line, and we will hear from them right after this CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The BC Coroner Service says 176 people died of toxic drugs last month. That's an average of more than 5 lives lost every day, but a decrease of almost 20% compared to April. More than 1,000 people in BC have now suffered fatal overdoses between January and May. The president of a Surrey temple is dead after what appears to be a targeted shooting last night after evening prayers. Hardeep Singh Najjar was found inside a vehicle in the parking lot of Guru Nanak Gurdwara. No arrests have been made, and police say they are searching for a motive, but supporters of Najjar say he had been threatened in the past because of his calls for a separate Sikh state in India. And a serious crash east of Kamloops has forced the closure of Highway 97 in both directions. It happened shortly before 10 o'clock this morning near Monty Lake. There's no word on when the route will reopen. And now the forecast on the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 20. Highs reaching 16 with a chance of showers and local smoke in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 16 as well. Highs to 15 and mainly cloudy in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 14 degrees. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, periods of rain this afternoon with highs around 16. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC on radio at 88.1 FM in Vancouver. You can watch us live streaming as well, cbc.ca/BC. You can go to CBC Vancouver's YouTube page and search for us there, or you can also use the CBC Gem app. And we're continuing a little bit longer with our discussion here in light of public consultations beginning this week on a housing proposal that would double the population of Vancouver's West Point Grey neighborhood. This is the Jericho Lands project that's being spearheaded by 3 First Nations. And the project includes dozens of buildings, a mix of community and park spaces. It has faced opposition from some nearby homeowners. And the project is happening alongside a push by the province, of course, for more housing. And this is in light of the growing population in Metro Vancouver. So in light of that, what do you think of adding density to try and address the housing need in BC? And what do you think of neighborhood preservation or heritage preservation? How do you interpret that? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. And we have some people who have been waiting on the line. Let's just get to them as well and hear from them. Lynn is calling us from Victoria. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Michelle. My comment is density without true affordability is just what's happening in Victoria. We have homes being raised and apartments being raised that were affordable, and now they're $1,900 a month up for one bedroom. Probably this year they're even more. We need to get back to pre-1993 when the government at the time cut funding to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation whose mandate was to create housing for people, not for the wealthy. That's my comment.
More federal government involvement.
Yes, it has to be it has to have the will from the government. Market housing doesn't work. The trickle-down effect, which is, this system we're in, it doesn't trickle down, it trickles up. And we've had this housing emergency since Jack Layton was alive and tried when he was a city councillor to get truly affordable housing, but the motion under his NDP government was tabled by the government at the time. There is no will to create truly affordable housing.
Okay, hearkening back to Jack Layton. Lynn, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye.
That's bye-bye, Lynn in Victoria. Let's stay on the island now. Anne-Marie is in Langford to comment on density. Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hi. I just wanted to comment on the comment made on your show about like if students want to like live in a high rise, then obviously there's a need for it, because one of your previous guests was talking about how he has to pay a lot of money to stay in a building with 9 other people. Mm-hmm. And my point is that lower middle class students aren't going to be able to afford to live in this high rise. He's saying, oh, there's 2 bus lines, and like it's just rich kids that are going to live there, and I just don't feel like that's like equitable housing. And to comment about families, I liked what you said about how if there's families, there will be schools, and then hopefully they'll go to post-secondary at UBC or whatever, community college, and stay. But if there's no affordable housing, families aren't going to stay, to the previous caller's point. Also, like if there's no affordable housing, everyone is going to leave cities. I used to live in Toronto, Ontario, and I now live on the island. And the healthy communities in a big city are the ones with like the local swimming pools, the beautiful parks. Like when there's families, that's a sign of a healthy community. And when there isn't families, what's going to happen in 20, 30 years? Okay. There's going to be a population decline. Do you know what I mean? So that was just the point I wanted to make.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, thanks so much for the call. Good to hear from you. Take care. Mike is up next in Williams Lake now. Hi, Mike. What do you make of density as a response to a housing need in BC?
Well, BC is a large province, and there's a lot of other communities that I think people could spread out to. This project, I feel, is, in a sense, a ghetto waiting to happen.
Why do you say that?
These extremely high-density, high-rise things are similar to the projects that they were building in the 70s down in the States that were designed for families, but families quickly find they're overcrowded. They tend to have people on top of one another. There's parking issues. It just creates a huge strain on the community that's already in place through extra crowding of stores and businesses, where people shopping and stuff like that. The roads, the sewer systems, the water systems. The areas, in the Lower Mainland are overcrowded to begin with. There's just not enough services. People don't have enough medical services, other things like this that they require. Hospitals and stuff are packed. They don't have staff. I don't feel that adding this extra strain is going to help. I think it'd be better if people, instead of moving all into one area, spread out over the rest of the province. There's a whole lot of province.
The pressure, so move to Williams Lake, is that what you're saying?
Well, not just here. I mean, I'm just saying everywhere. Yeah. There's a lot of communities that need people to come in and help to rebuild. Like Merritt, for instance, is a perfect example, except who wants to drive all the way to Kamloops to get medical assistance if you live in Merritt?
The stretch there to get health care. I mean, we saw that over the pandemic, right? People moving to places like Kelowna to get more affordable housing in comparison to Metro Vancouver. Mike, thank you very much. The pressure that added density will put on services was Mike's point there. Let's just quickly wrap up with Leanne and Chilliwack and then get a comment from Tom Davidoff, who's been listening to these calls. Hi, Leanne.
Oh, hello. The so-called benefits do not outweigh the costs, or the other way around. I used to work on that property in the headquarters building. And have you walked around that property? Are you aware of the forest which will be cut down? Sure, they're going to leave a couple of acres of trees. So what? I'm just astonished that that's going to happen. It should be made into a second Stanley Park and just left to keep the air cooler in Vancouver. The other comment regarding trickle down and trickle up, I agree with your previous caller in that you're building, the rents are not going to come down. Prices will not come down. The more you build, the more it's going to cost. Out here in Chilliwack, there are 500 square foot condos being sold for $400,000. So the whole project doesn't make sense to me.
Leanne, thank you very much for your call as well. That's Leanne in Chilliwack. Let's wrap up with Tom Davidoff, professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. People, they're making the argument that just because you build more doesn't mean those prices will go down.
Yeah, so a few points were made there. One was the houses are too fancy and are only for rich people. Another caller said the houses are too bad and it's going to turn into a ghetto full of low-income people. I don't know.
Just that it would be overcrowded, I think was his point.
Yeah, overcrowded, and eventually people will hate it, and only people who can only afford not great housing will live there. I do think over time, new housing becomes older housing. I don't think these units are going to be super fancy. They're going to be small. The reason housing is so expensive is there's too many people and not enough homes. So if the argument is we can't build more housing because housing is too expensive, obviously that's nonsensical, because over time things are just going to get worse and worse and worse as more and more people are chasing the same number of units instead of more units. So failing to build 13,000 homes because there's a desperate need for homes is really not very sensible. Yep, some people do need income support. Maybe we should be giving income support to moderate income families or to students at UBC struggling to get an education. That's fine. The last point I'd make about is your last caller with the trees. Mm-hmm. And I am very sympathetic to the view that cutting down a tree is a really lousy thing to do. I will say that if you're going to cut down trees, let's get our money's worth. So rather than building at low density in Williams Lake and cutting down the same number of trees for, maybe 20 or 100 homes, if we're going to be in the business of cutting down trees so that people can live somewhere, let's really get our money's worth, our trees worth, and put lots of people there to minimize the environmental destruction we need to do to accommodate people who want to live in Canada.
People have thoughts, Tom. People have opinions. It's certainly a topic up for debate. People care about housing here in BC. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Tom Davidoff is Associate Professor at UBC School of Business. And some emails now. Carla writes, we need more low-rise buildings with family-sized units spread throughout the city. They need to be co-op, market rental, and strata. After living in Vancouver for almost 20 years, we chose to move to North Vancouver. The lack of secure family-sized rentals was a huge factor. Palinka writes, I don't think density is the answer, at least in my area of North Shuswap Lake. Here, there are many middle and low-income locals and newcomers, including professionals with kids struggling to find places to rent year-round. We need, as a society, to learn how to share multi-generationally. Thanks very much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca is where you can reach us. It's 12:42, 1:42 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio, as well as live streaming online, cbc.ca/BC, on our YouTube page at CBC Vancouver, as well as the CBC Gem app. Well, by 2035, all new cars sold in BC will be zero emission, according to the province. Now, that's 5 years ahead of schedule under the BC government's Zero Emission Vehicles Act. And the Minister of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, Josie Osborne, says interest continues to grow with more than 100,000 EVs registered in the province. And last week, BC announced it would be amending the Strata Property Act as well to make it easier for Strata owners to have charging stations installed. We have Ken Boker back to take your questions about electric vehicles and charging stations. He's the host of the EV Revolution show on YouTube. And Ken joins us now. Hi there.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Very well. Thanks so much for joining us once again. And
thank you.
Our listeners and viewers as well, you can call and join us with your questions, your thoughts about electric vehicles. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And Ken, I just mentioned there the announcement from the BC government in terms of being ahead of schedule when it comes to requiring new vehicle sales to be zero emission. Is interest really growing?
Yes, it is. Michelle, BC is actually the leading province now in Canada for EV adoption. So it's surpassed Quebec in that capacity. As of the end of 2022, about 18% of all new vehicles, light-duty vehicles, so these are cars, sedans, pickup trucks, and SUVs, 18% were all electric, a battery all electric. And right now it's trending that we may see about 23% or so this year for the province to exceed that number. So that target that you just read out by the government lowering their time frame to reach significant targets, I think is very achievable.
And what about, we heard about long wait lists to be able to get an electric vehicle. How are things on that front?
Well, if anything is going to slow it down, you're absolutely right, Michelle. It's going to be the long wait list. as the OEMs, the vendors, the Fords, the Chryslers, the GMs, and everybody launch to all electrics, of course, it takes them time to spin up production and to get allocation, especially to Canada here. So we are seeing some delays, depending on what product, what vendor you're looking at. Some of those delays could be up to a year. They are continually working on increasing production. A lot of those manufacturers are moving to build plants in the US. Obviously, one, to increase production capacity, but also to take advantage of the US IRA and the rebates and incentives there. So we will see deliveries get better, but that is part of the issue in creating the slowdown for some people that may have to wait a year or so.
Okay, a year. Ken Bokar is with me. He's the host of the EV Revolution show on YouTube. And we've had him on before to take your questions on electric vehicles. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. Our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. And a question now about priorities. I wanted to ask you about what about electric public transportation? We have a question by email from David, who writes, why do governmental policies in BC seem to be prioritizing subsidies for private purchase and public infrastructures for electric private vehicles instead of electrifying mass public transit? As we shift to electrifying mobility in our cities, we need to carefully examine the trajectory of where public funding is going. As transportation planners and researchers know, the biggest bang for the buck will be in electrifying public mass transit. Our mass transit network needs to be desperately expanded further to reduce sprawl and congestion. So what are the efforts being made for public transportation to electrify?
Yeah, there's a lot of municipalities and regions in Canada that are looking at electrified transportation, most notably electric buses. Both a single unit and some of the accordion buses for larger fleets. A lot of cities are doing pilots right now. Toronto is one. Brampton and many others across Canada are looking at those buses. That is something that they're looking at. They're aggressively looking down that path because of the lower total cost of ownership for those fleets that they're looking to deploy. There is some funding that's trickling down to the municipalities and regions for that, but it is one of those where they need to look at the use case, look at the right manufacturer and the right bus for their needs and their environments for the routes that they're going to put these in. Then there's also the charging infrastructure that they need to deploy for the buses. There are some really neat chargers now that the bus just drives up and stops when it stops at a stop, and this kind of device just comes down and touches the top of the bus where the charging rails are, and it charges there for 10 minutes at a high voltage. So there are some really cool systems out there. It is slowly happening, and I agree with that emailer that it does make a big impact. One bus can take about 55 vehicles of equivalent of greenhouse gases off the road each day that it's in operation. So it's certainly something to look forward to.
Let's take a call now to Ken Bokar, the EV Revolution show on YouTube. And our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Your questions on electric vehicles. And Wendy is calling us now from Chilliwack. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, I'm calling because I've been a very proud EV owner for the last 4.5 years. And I love driving my car. I find it so much fun. But the thing that's always made me curious is what is going to happen to all of the gas vehicles that are out there as we transition over? It's always been kind of in the back of my mind.
Yeah, that's a good question. Wendy, thank you very much. What will happen to them?
Yeah, great question, Wendy, and thanks for that. I was just in Chilliwack for a bit last week. So as this transition to electric, it may sound and it may look like it's happening extremely fast, but when you look at the broad scale of the global vehicle landscape, especially light-duty vehicles, there's a lot of vehicles that are out there. In Canada specifically, we have about 20 million light-duty vehicles that are in operation today. Only about 350,000 or so of those are plug-in vehicles, so all electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. So we have a long way to go to displace that fleet. So the answer is that displacement from ICE to EV is going to take a long time. It's going to take several decades, probably 30 to 40 years to really kind of fully go through. Most cars are kept in operation now. Us Canadians like to keep our cars going as long as we can. We'll duct tape them and do whatever we need to do. So the average car is, in operation for at least 10 years, probably closer to 12 to 13 years. So it's going to be a slower transition. as we see EVs pick up. Plus, again, the OEMs need to start producing many more EVs than they are today, especially for our marketplace here in North America. And that's not happening yet. So this whole thing is going to take some time, and it will be more of a gradual transition. And that's where you'll see the displacement of ICE Vs happen.
Okay, and can we just for people who don't know, OEM, you're talking about original equipment manufacturer.
Correct. So the
Just
auto
to get our
manufacturers,
acronyms
the
right,
Fords, GMs, Chryslers, all that stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Just for people who are trying to keep track. Paolo is our next caller now in Vancouver. Hi, Paolo.
Hi, how's it going?
Fine, thank you. What's your question or comment about electric vehicles?
My comment is just with respect to ICBC and the fact that you have to have your electric vehicle insured separately from your normal vehicle, shall we say. So there's a lot of people, I think, that are not adopting electric vehicles because the cost of having two vehicles insured and the fact that they only maybe need the gas-powered one occasionally, but it's enough that they do want to keep it and they're not willing to have a whole separate vehicle insured. I think that ICBC could offer some support here by allowing people to have one license plate that's insured for the higher cost vehicle that you could then swap back and forth. So maybe you leave it on your electric vehicle all week while you commute to and from work, and then on the weekend you log into ICBC, you reassign the plate to your other vehicle, and then you move it over. And I think that with the switch to computer database where we're no longer using stickers on our license plates, it seems like if people had the flexibility to be able to move their insurance between a second vehicle, you'd probably have more people adopting electric vehicles without having to worry about the range for the occasional time they may exceed it.
Right. Paolo, thank you so much. Have you heard that suggestion before, Ken?
I have not, but that's a great suggestion. Here in Ontario, we also have electronic renewals now for plates and stuff. So everything is computerized. Certainly what Paolo was suggesting could be done quite easily by the government. I would certainly, lobby your MPP and start posing those questions to see if there's something they can do to push ICBC down that route. They seem to be progressive in doing that. And, typically we're seeing insurance rates somewhat cheaper in some cases because of the safety elements that EVs bring. So hopefully your guys are seeing that in BC as well.
Okay. Wonder how feasible that would be, Paolo. Thank you for the call. David in Sydney asks, the carbon footprint to produce an electric vehicle car compared to a gas vehicle is similar. Does the production footprint justify the EV long term?
Well, it's a great question. We get asked that quite a lot. So absolutely, it is justified. If you look at the science for the life cycle of the EV, so kind of cradle to grave or those type of aspects, which you'll hear, there's tons of science on it. When you look at the production, even from the sourcing of the minerals to the producing the batteries, to the building of the vehicles, the use of the vehicles throughout their life cycle, let's say 10 years, and then the destruction of those vehicles and the battery packs, which in this case, battery packs, the current technologies over the last 4 to 5, let's say 6 years, those packs are now 95% recyclable. And there's lots of companies and also the car manufacturers are looking to take those back and recycle them. So there is that business growing, and also the reuse of some of those battery packs into secondary storage systems and things like that. So when you take all that data throughout the life cycle, it still shows that an all-electric vehicle has less of a carbon impact than an internal combustion vehicle. Remember, you've got to find the oil. There's all that energy in prospecting. You have to pump it out. You have to ship it. You have to refine it. You have to ship it again. But there's a lot of energy use in that. So it's not all about mining in that aspect.
I appreciate your enthusiasm about electric vehicles. We do have comments like this one coming in as well. Tanya writes, this discussion on electric vehicles is leaving out the massive environmental impact of building the vehicles, mining the materials, and when the cars actually reach zero emissions based on all the manufacturing inputs, etc. And in the end, EVs will not save the planet unless big, massive cross-industry efforts are made at larger scales by big players. We will not achieve anything significant as a collective group. Thank you very much for your input as well, Tanya. And Sheena is our next caller now in Victoria to wrap us up. Hi, Sheena.
Hello.
Hi. What are your thoughts today?
Well, I'm really concerned about the over-privileging of electric vehicles to the detriment of other green vehicles. Because unless the source of the electricity is completely clean, such as hydro, then you're not helping the planet. And there are, in fact, still a lot of places that burn fossil fuels to manufacture electricity. So I think we need
to research and promote other options as well, such as hydrogen fuel cell. But almost all governments are giving rebates for electric vehicles, not looking at the others. I heard a comment on the radio a few weeks ago about hydrogen fuel cells, and somebody said, well, you'd have to build the infrastructure. Well, yeah, you have to build the infrastructure, just like we're building the infrastructure for electric vehicles.
Right. All right. Sheena, thank you very much for your point as well. I can see Ken Bokor nodding as you speak. And so what about the prioritizing other greener options, hydrogen fuel cells?
Certainly something that we do need to look at. And Sheena, I appreciate the comments and the question. Again, I will correct you that if you look at the science, even if you were to charge your EV for its life cycle through a coal-powered plant, it still would have less of a carbon impact. So I would encourage you to check out the real science on that.
And where would people go for that? Where would people source that?
It's a good question. If you just Google that, you'll find there are some kind of like groups of concerned scientists. I forget the organizations that have done lots of studies on this, and there's a whole different, and some universities as well in collaboration with others. So I have read a few reports over the last couple of years that are showing that that whole life cycle is still greener, because remember, you're not emitting anything while you're driving and using that vehicle. And that's the most part of that use case. The life cycle of the vehicle is when you're using it. Now, to get to the alternate fuels, absolutely, I'd love to see more hydrogen. And as you commented, it's a struggle right now for the infrastructure. Yes, they're slowly building that, but it's very expensive. It's very costly. I know Burnaby, as an example, is leading the way in building hydrogen infrastructure for fueling vehicles, but we're a long way away. And remember, we have to get this stuff to the average consumer. Right now, EV stations are rolling out by the hundreds, by the dozens and thousands across Canada. That infrastructure is well underway. Hydrogen isn't even there yet. If I had a hydrogen vehicle here in Ontario, I had no spot to go refuel it anywhere in the province. So that is something that needs to get there for consumers to adopt. Commercially, it's extremely viable, and we see a lot of that.
Okay, and I'm going to very quickly, John, if you can just ask your question very quickly and get a quick answer from you. Ken, you want to know about natural resources for batteries?
Yeah, cobalt in particular. We're talking about a lot of electric vehicles here. And I'm just wondering where Canada's going to get the cobalt to make all the batteries.
John, thank you very much. In about 30 seconds, Ken, if you don't mind.
Good question. The simple answer is cobalt is still needed, but we are seeing the battery manufacturers move away from the reliance on cobalt. And there is more than just one spot on the planet to get cobalt. So we're seeing minerals like graphene and graphite being substituted as we move towards solid state and other chemistries. So I think the reliance on cobalt is going to go away this decade.
John, I'm glad we got your question in. Thanks so much. And Ken, great to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you for having me on.
That's Ken Bokor, the host of the EV Revolution show on YouTube. That's it for our show today, which you can also catch on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, cbc.ca/BC, and the CBC Gem app. You can listen online again as well. Use the CBC Listen app. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you for listening and watching. Have a great afternoon.